So just as a little bit of an exercise to kick things off, I'm going to ask each of our panelists to briefly explain what they do and how many people work for their company. So Adam, tell us what Marcus does.
So Marcus is Goldman Sachs' consumer offering. We have about 1,500 employees.
Okay. And Zach, tell us about Plaid.
So Plaid, we build infrastructure to power financial technology broadly. The core concept is that we want to allow a consumer to interact with their bank account, give them the functionality that they'd have when standing in a bank branch, but do it through whatever app they want to use. You can think of us as the financial plumbing that connects your bank account to whatever app it is that you want to use. In one example, you can say Clarity Money, the connectivity between your bank account and the Clarity Money app. We are 300.
Thanks for the plug.
Yeah, that's great. We're 350 people based in San Francisco, but partially in New York as well.
Okay, so 1,500 people, 350 people. Sigal, you're at Morgan Stanley.
So I'm with Morgan Stanley. Morgan Stanley is in main three lines of business: institutional securities, wealth management, and investment management. In technology, we have 15,000 technologists.
15,000 technologists?
15,000.
And that's just the technologists?
They're just technologists.
And how many employees company-wide?
About 65,000.
65,000, okay. So 1,500, 350, 65,000. Clearly different, completely different managerial cultures across just automatically come with those numbers. So the question that I have for you, Sigal, I know your title is Head of Transformation. It is your job to drive innovation and change. How do you do that? How do you make innovation central to the culture across an organization that's got that kind of huge scale?
So I would say it starts with our values. One of our values is lead with excellence ideas and exceptional ideas. And within that, it's really a three-pronged approach that we are driving. We are looking at innovation from center of excellence that are focusing on specific technologies like cloud, like AI, ML, data and analytics, automation. So that's one thing. Second thing is we have a team that is scouting for new startups and new fintechs and new ideas and disruptive ideas and trying to think how can we partner with those companies and either use those services or bring them into our organization.
So you're saying that in some cases it's going to make more sense for you to find a sort of startup-paced partner than to try to develop a startup-paced business in-house.
Exactly, and we are looking for disruptive ideas and think about how do we integrate them in.
Mm-hmm.
And the third thing that we do, we do have an innovation lab, and we do run sandboxes for innovation and run challenges and all kind of crowdsourcing ideas, and we are funding those, focusing on business value, but it is a joint technology and business innovation lab. It's not just within technology, so it's across the board, across all employees.
And when you've got a staff that big, how do you measure innovation? I mean, how do you determine whether a given division or a given individual or manager is being essentially innovative enough?
I think personally, innovation is continuous improvement and continuous reinvention. And it is not just you wake up in the morning or you go to a class and you're becoming innovative.
Sure.
You really has to make sure that you are solicited and encouraging people to come up with exceptional ideas no matter what you do. I think that the way we are encouraging it is by changing some of our system and structures. So when we are doing performance evaluations, we are looking as that person came up with new ideas. Are they exhibiting the values that we are looking for around innovation? When we are trying to think about promotions, we are thinking about if those people have exhibited innovative ideas and have implemented something innovative. But the key is really to focus on business value with innovation. So not just innovation for innovation's sake, but really what's the business value that we are bringing, and does those ideas bring good outcomes at the end?
Mm-hmm. Adam, I want to switch back to you because you had the experience of working in the startup world, but now you're working for Marcus, which is of course in turn a branch of Goldman Sachs, a Morgan Stanley-sized operation. In the course of, you had to start up Clarity Money, which has become part of Marcus. It's a personal finance app. In the process of getting to know the Goldman people, did they sort of look at your company through the eyes of a large organization? Was there sort of a cultural collision of you coming from a VC background, suddenly talking to this organization that is famously tentacled worldwide?
Yeah, I mean, I've been very impressed by the leadership of Goldman Sachs and their recognition of the need to create a space inside a large company to allow innovation to occur. I liken the Marcus by Goldman Sachs initiative as their AWS, in that they have made a significant financial commitment, but also a cultural one, to bring in teams and resources that can allow innovation to flourish. Clarity Money being just one component of that. We've acquired other businesses that have been ingredients in the Marcus ecosystem, and I think it is a real tribute to the leadership's understanding of what is required for innovation to prosper in a large organization to create that space.
So what's part of that recipe? Is it just kind of like support you and get out of the way? You mentioned there was nothing to break at Marcus because Marcus was new.
Well, part of it is an alignment of goals and interests. Clarity Money was predicated on the notion that it is inevitable that there will be a digital assistant that will help consumers navigate financial choice. That digital assistant will be your advocate and will understand your preferences. And Marcus by Goldman Sachs is very much about transparency and advocacy. Our ethos is we'd rather show you than tell you. And so no fees, a fair interest rate on your deposits, a fair interest rate if you need to borrow, and tools designed to encourage financial well-being. That alignment between Marcus's brand vision and values and the Clarity vision were very, very tightly coupled. And I think that's why I have found my time at Goldman Sachs to be so enjoyable. We are absolutely on a mission to transform the way consumers interact with their financial partner. And that financial partner, in our belief, ought to be on your side.
Is the feedback loop, I've been a customer of bigger traditional banks for a long time, and I often find that they have evolved, but they seem to evolve very slowly. Is the sort of Marcus ecosystem designed to make that feedback loop happen a little faster? Are you responding very quickly to what customers seem to be positive or negative about?
Yeah, we're very, very driven by consumer focus. What does the customer actually want? To your question about incumbent banks and their reaction to the changing ecosystem in financial services, I like to say that there are two kinds of incumbent banks. There are banks that are screwed, and there are banks that don't know they're screwed. And I really believe that Goldman Sachs is uniquely positioned to push the industry forward in the same way that retail has been transformed by Amazon, Uber has transformed transportation, Apple's transformed music. I think Goldman's in a unique position to force the industry to be more accountable to the consumer, to not fleece the consumer out of $200 in fees per year, for which they are receiving very little value.
Thanks. Zach, you were, I know that if I understand your Plaid's business model correctly, and stop me if I'm wrong, you're essentially connecting services like Marcus or services like Clarity Money to banks of all kinds. If a bank is working with Plaid, are they by definition kind of already, to use Adam's language, not screwed? Are they a bank that gets it? Or are you kind of serving banks across the spectrum of screwed and not screwed?
Well, maybe just to nuance a little bit your description of how we work.
Yeah.
You can think of our business as two sides. On our back end, we've integrated with about 15,000 banks across the US, Canada. 15,000
banks?
15,000 banks
Okay.
Across US,
Both
Canada.
screwed and unscrewed.
Yeah, to be clear, that's all the banks.
Yes.
Like all of the banks that exist in the US, Canada, and Europe, that's us. So those integrations allow a consumer to connect their bank account to an application when the consumer chooses to do so. So the consumer, let's say, comes to the Clarity Money app, says, I want to use this app, I need to connect my bank account. Then on the back end, Clarity is using Plaid to actually do that connectivity. But the consumer is the one that's doing all the permissioning.
Yes.
And we have the kind of uniting theory for our business, which is make money easier for everyone. Like it's like full stop. That's what we're focused on. And we believe by giving the consumer access to more products, more tools, more choices, that in net, the ecosystem is going to get better because people are going to offer the consumer cheaper rates, kind of better products, better communication, whatever it is, that helps the consumer live that better financial life. But to your question, we have two sides. Backend is integrating with banks. Then we have applications built on top of Plaid. Some of those applications are built by the banks. And so I will not comment on if banks are screwed or not screwed. But there certainly are banks that are very forward-leaning in technology. Sure. You hear things, you see all of the goings on with Marcus, that's really exciting. You hear things like JP Morgan saying that they have $1 billion technology budget. That's really exciting. I think at one point Jamie Dimon said that he saw them as a tech company, not as a bank. That's the kind of attitude that I suspect will become more common in the banks that continue to outperform in the future. And that's the kind of attitude that we see in the non-bank fintech community. So the community of people that are building applications like a Venmo or a Robinhood or things like that, they're saying, well, we're a technology company that is doing financial services as opposed to the other way around.
When you're dealing with a bank that is, let's say, well-meaning but not quite fully financially woke yet, in that sense, technically woke, I should say.
Are we allowed to call banks woke?
I'm already regretting it, and I think I'm going to walk it back. Well, let's say banks that are very you use the description of really leaning into the technology.
Sure.
If you have a bank that knows it needs you, I mean, you're working, as you say, with just about every bank. I mean, do you wind up interacting very often with bank clients that are further behind on the learning curve, and are you and when that happens, what's the dynamic like?
Completely. Not to say any disservice to banks. They have an incredible amount of things to do, and they have a lot of work to do, and they've become experts in certain things. And many of them are coming to technology. They came to technology later in their life cycle. You could build a bank 100 years ago without any technology. Now, today, you have to be quite good at it. And so, yeah, there's a huge learning curve. I think there's a big kind of divide between the banks. There's also the question of the regulators understanding technology as well, where oftentimes they don't. I was talking to one regulator who will not be named, and they said that more than half of their examiners didn't have a smartphone. That's shocking, and they're bank examiners. And so there's a lot of gaps that we have to solve. I think from our side, from the fintech side, it's about patience, and from the bank side, it's also about patience and being willing to figure out a collaborative solution that's best for consumers.
But I think you have to actually look at a more fundamental set of variables. The branch network adds 1.5 basis points to the cost structure of an individual account. And that is an unnecessary expense that the consumer is bearing. And with trust and with transparency, you can offer the consumer a much better structural deal and pass that savings on to the consumer in a way that the traditional incumbent banks simply cannot. And if you look at how their bread is buttered, the revenue that they receive from interest has been cut in half in the last 20 years, and the revenue that they receive from fees has tripled. And so this is a good time to be in the banking business, but it is at the expense of the consumer. And that is inevitably going to change.
So Zach mentioned patient.
Yes.
I wanted to comment on that because I do think that at least us as a bank, stability and safety is paramount, and that is really, really important. So even when working with startup companies and trying to experiment with new technologies, or even developing within our sandboxes and labs some new ideas that we want to build on, we need to make sure that at the end, when it's ready for prime time, it is safe and secure and it is stable. Because we do have a big business that needs that safety and stability. So patient is paramount for small companies working with big companies, but it's also paramount for big companies that how do they work in a collaborative way with the startups to make sure that we can integrate the technology that will be stable and will not upset or will not create unwanted consequences.
And just for the sake of fintech, would be in trouble if I didn't say that, of course, security and privacy is paramount to every fintech company as well.
Sure.
Just
Right.
there's different approaches.
Different angles, sure.
Yeah.
And Sagal, you and Morgan Stanley are working with a very large ecosystem of startups at any given time. Is that correct?
Right. We are looking at more than 1,000 companies a year. And what we do have is a marquee event every year. We just came from Silicon Valley. We had our 19th event. We started with one of the pioneers on Wall Street to do that. Other companies are doing the same. And we are inviting many companies to a few days event where we bring business partners, when we bring our technologies, and different companies that we are talking to about potential partnership, and we are evaluating the product. We are giving them advice on the roadmap. How do we see the roadmap fit within our environments, asking questions, learning from them. And then after that, we kind of spin off a lot of POCs, a lot of initiatives in order to see how can those products that we deem the best fit can help us disrupt what we are doing already. And how do we integrate them into our environment? And we've had great success with that, and we are continuing that event.
What's an example of a recent change or a disruption within Morgan Stanley that has reached now the customer-facing, public-facing phase that has kind of come through this process that you're describing?
So every year we give out awards. Mm-hmm. And this year we gave awards to Confluence, we gave awards to Zoom, and we gave awards to a third company that I lost the name. But those companies are ones that we are very publicly communicating that we're working with, and we do that every year. We give awards. So Zoom, for example, is one that we worked with for a while, and we think that technology can really change the way we're interacting with our customers, with our clients.
This is Zoom, the video provider.
Video provider on the investment banking side. So that's one that we think is really going to change the game for us going forward.
Thanks. I'd like to be able to throw things open to the floor for questions at some point. As you probably know by now, we've got people with microphones who will come to you if you have a question. So if you have a question for any of the panelists, I hope you'll put your hand in the air, and I'll keep my eye out for you. Before we go there, I wanted to talk a little bit more. This panel was booked as talking about where we think the next great innovation will come from. I'm also just curious to know what we think the next great innovation is going to be. I mean, I feel like so many of the things we're talking about this week have been sort of at the cusp of, technology's nearing a turning point, but not quite there yet. But I'll start with you, Adam. Where do you see sort of the next sort of ripest target for technological disruption?
Well, I think it's very easy to become enamored with the next new shiny thing.
Sure.
And lose sight of just how much fundamental work needs to be done to deliver on the promise of things like frictionless money movement, AI, personalized insights, all the things that Plaid is working on to deliver the plumbing, all the things that we're working on to uncover actionable, specific insights that are contextual and relevant to your life. That work is still very much in its infancy. There are structural components of the financial services world that need to be addressed, particularly around frictionless money movement, bill pay, sending money across border, settlement. All those things need to be resolved, and there are a lot of smart folks working on it. And so there's quite a bit of work to be done on the ideas we've already uncovered.
Should I put the word blockchain in there just so I could say I got it into my panel?
You can do whatever you want.
Nice, thank you. Blockchain. Okay, Zach, going to you. Where are you seeing? What's the next what's the next innovation on your wish list? Let me put it that way.
So it's actually funny that you asked. We have a wish list. We publish a wish list every year of what we would what we wished would exist in financial services. This year we're starting to noodle on what that wish list will be. It's called a request for startups. The goal being there's a huge universe of fintech companies, and we feel that sometimes there are areas that are just missed. Mm-hmm. I think the theme of the RFS request for startups this year is probably going to be around student debt and student lending. It's an area that has a ton of attention from a media perspective, but very few products that are actually focused on people that have a great deal of student debt. And so we suspect that there's a lot of opportunity to improve there. But I mean, kind of going back to what Adam said, financial services is just barely becoming digital. We were just barely getting out of this world where to apply for a mortgage, you bring a shoebox full of documents and you hand it to your mortgage broker, and they read over it, they enter it into an Excel model, and 3 weeks later they call you and say, hey, this is your rate. That still exists. Most people actually get mortgages still that way. And so that is endemic of the rest of financial services. So there's still a huge amount of work to be done just on the things that, at this point are boring for us. So getting paper out of the system. There's still a lot of growth there.
And freeing people up to be creative about what the model tells them.
Exactly.
Sigal, how about for you?
I agree. There is still a lot of work to implement stuff that is already prime time and in production in financial services, and take advantage of the tools that are already in existence at scale. And one thing that I would say that we did see, looking at many of the startups that we looked at a few weeks back, is that even companies that are not in the AI/ML space are integrating some of those concepts into their products and services. So even established companies or new companies that are selling you one thing that is not related to artificial intelligence on machine learning, they're integrating some of those concepts into their products so you can get a higher level service and will be able to take much more advantage and impact your business on a bigger scale. And that was really interesting. How do you use data?
Yes.
It is so much available today and different sources of data to improve a product or an idea that you have. And I found that fascinating because there's so much you can still do with that.
Oh my gosh, and so many people in this room who are grappling with exactly that. So, well, I want to thank we're out of time unfortunately, but I want to thank our panelists for being here with us. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks for educating me and the audience. Sigal Zarmi, Zach Parrott, and Adam Dell. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.